Thank you all again so much for being here. I am Elise Joseph. Kristine just said Kristine and I are both in Los Angeles. I work with brands and creatives on things like strategy and ideas generation and visual storytelling. And Kristine and I have known each other for several years now. We co-hosted our first virtual meeting back in February on self-compassion. Some of you may be joining us again. Thank you for coming today. Kristine Claghorn, she is definitely the expert here. I'd call myself more of a curious or hopeful enthusiast. But really, I love getting to hold space with each other and connect and deep dive into these really important and relevant topics. And it's so cool to see. We never quite know what it's going to be like as we're kind of organizing these things, and it's exciting that so many of you are here with us. So um, self-worth. I realized last year, just personally, I was just being so unkind to myself and had such negative self-talk and criticism, and I just feel like it was really holding me back and lowering my self-esteem and causing me to isolate and procrastinate. And as a freelancer, I can really struggle with burnout and comparison. And I feel like Kristine has been such a helpful friend and teacher to me. She is a Stanford educated coach. She uses tools like neuroplasticity, self compassion, mindfulness, and nervous system regulation, and many other things to help move through these kinds of themes and create positive change ultimately. She offers one-on-one coaching and hosts regular events both in person and online. And together, we definitely want to continue to offer these virtual sessions going forward. I think we're talking about like every other month, like a bi-monthly thing. So today we're exploring self-worth, and I will pass the mic over to Kristine to get us started.
Yay. I'm so happy to be here with everyone. Again, I just love being in these spaces together virtually because it can be from all over the world. We're just all collectively interested in the same thing, which is usually doing something really good for ourselves. Like Elise, I've struggled with self-criticism and negative self-talk for most of my life. I honestly didn't know there was another way to live until I started learning more about self-worth and self-compassion and other tools to move through suffering. All right, so I wanted to just kind of reflect on these two questions really quick before we kind of dive into what self-worth is. So the two questions are, what makes you feel worthy and what makes you feel less worthy? And you're more than welcome to kind of share in the chat your answers to these questions, maybe reflect for a little bit, write them down in a notebook, or you can unmute and share too. And like what I kind of think of, what pops up for me first is what makes me feel worthy. When I think about like the way that I've always been, the way that I was taught growing up is kind of, if you succeed, you're worthy. And if you don't, you're unworthy. Or if someone doesn't give you recognition or approval, then you're not worthy. Like if you're not hitting societal expectations or milestones that you're supposed to be hitting by a certain time, you're not worthy. Like things like that. I feel like a lot of people can probably relate to those things. And yeah.
Success is a big one for me, for sure.
Success is a big one, like productivity,
Mhm.
health. Belinda shared historically career wins, though this has become hollow. Yes, I feel like a lot of us find that it's like we can succeed and feel really good about ourselves, but if we don't continue to succeed, then it like decreases. So it's like you keep having to fight your way to feeling worthy. Yeah, unfortunately, this has often been external validation from other people. That's very common. We're also taught that that's like what we need to be like worthy to be good people, is that other people need to tell us that we're good people.
Or like hitting certain benchmarks, like you were
Yeah.
saying, societal expectations. I feel like that's a big one that I think about a lot in my life.
Yeah. And I feel like, especially for women too, we are taught that we always need to be taking care of other people and nurturing other people. So if we're not doing that, or if we're not getting recognition for doing that, or for doing something independently, it can make us feel less worthy too.
social media comparison.
High. Social media comparison, struggle to find self-worth from within myself. Yes, that's very, very, very common. For many of us, we're taught that self-worth is tied to our successes and failures in our careers, relationships, and how quote unquote productive we are. We attach our self-worth to the opinions of others. And nowadays we even allow strangers on social media to judge our worthiness. And as soon as we fail or lose approval, we experience low self-worth. But the good news is that we've kind of got it all wrong here. So what is self-worth? Self-worth is the internal sense of being good enough just as you are. It doesn't fluctuate based on success or failure. It's a foundation that stays with you steadily through all of life's circumstances, whether good or bad. It isn't conditional or determined by external factors like career, success, or failure, relationships, age, or if you're meeting societal expectations. We all deserve to take up space, be seen, be heard, and understood. A healthy sense of self-worth is unconditional and distinct from our productivity and accomplishments. It doesn't involve comparing ourselves to others and allowing others to decide if we are enough. It's not something we can have more or less of. All humans deserve to be healthy, safe, loved, and supported equally. We all deserve that. And there are some factors, like some of the things we just talked about, that contribute to our struggle with low self-worth, and also why we link our self-worth to external factors. The first one being we often compare ourselves to others, especially in areas such as career achievements, wealth, appearance, and status. When we perceive others as more successful, we feel inadequate or lacking in comparison, even though all human beings have their own sets of strengths, values, and imperfections. And if we were all the same, it would be so boring. Like life would just be so boring if we all had the exact same skills, exact same strengths. And then second, society, media, and pop culture often portray success in very specific ways. So these messages can create the belief that one's value as a human being is tied to external achievements and recognition. Even our own upbringing has taught us, sometimes has taught us to criticize ourselves if we don't meet societal expectations. And like many of us said in the chat, we seek validation and approval from others, and we don't often trust our own opinions and beliefs, especially about ourselves. And we have a fear of failure and rejection and external criticism, which can drive us to pursue success as a means of proving our worthiness and avoiding negative judgment from others. And then lastly, we have a limited understanding of what self-worth is and equate it solely with external measures of success. And what's interesting about this list is it actually ties much more closely to self-esteem, which is an individual's subjective evaluation of our own worth based on external factors. It's inherently very fragile. It bounces up and down according to our latest successes and failures. It involves comparing ourselves to others or even feeling better than or worse than others. And it involves judgment, whether positive or negative. So it's kind of like a fair weather friend. It's there for you when you are doing really well, and it's not there for you when you're going through a hard time. And then we have self-confidence, which specifically refers to our belief in our abilities, skills, and judgments, which fluctuates based on our experiences. We build that through practice, learning, and mastering skills. So that fluctuates based on like what we do to achieve those things. So if we have a lot of practice, we become good at something. But then we have self-worth, which is distinct from our abilities and accomplishments. It doesn't involve comparing ourselves to others. It's not something you can have more or less of. It doesn't fluctuate based on external factors. There's no judgment involved whatsoever, no judgment of ourselves or of others. And it offers more emotional stability than self-esteem because it's always there for us when we're on top of the world and when we fall flat on our faces, which we all know that we experience both. And I will stop sharing my screen now. Yay. Now I can see your faces again, which is so nice. And another thing is our culture doesn't encourage us to be kind to ourselves, and neither does our negativity bias, which is an evolutionary trait we have where the brain preferentially looks for negative information over positive information. It also means we dwell on the negative. So don't feel bad if you've had a hard time developing self-worth. It's something we intentionally need to practice. We're changing our relationship with ourselves in order to kind of fix these habits of a lifetime. When we criticize ourselves, we are tapping into our body's threat defense system, our fight, flight, freeze, our fawn response. And among the ways that we can react to perceived danger or threats, self-criticism is actually our first reaction when things go wrong because it's the most quickest and easily triggered. And it worked really well in the past when we were in like hunter-gatherer bands in like the woods, because if you heard a twig snap and you ignored it, then you were more likely to like be eaten by a bear. But if you heard the twig snap and it activated your nervous system and you fight, flight, freeze, fawn, whatever, whichever one, you fight the bear, you run away, or you freeze, like you're much more likely to survive. But the threats we face nowadays are challenges to our self-image and self-concept, but our brain doesn't know the difference between a bear and a threat to our self-concept. So now that we have these types of threats that don't get completed, like if you're on social media and you're comparing yourself to others, you don't ever get away with that and complete that stress cycle. So it's really important to like intentionally do practices like these to try to negate that negativity bias and try to return to that rest and digest state with our parasympathetic nervous system is engaged and we feel safe. Because these incomplete stress cycles can lead to chronic stress, burnout, other health issues. It's also better for our relationships when we have that foundation of self-worth, because then we're relying more on ourselves to feel good when we're going through a hard time, and we don't have to rely on other people for every like hard thing we go through. And research has actually shown that individuals with a positive sense of self-worth tend to exhibit more adaptive stress responses, such as lower levels of the stress hormone cortisol and quicker recovery from stressful situations. It suggests that a strong sense of self-worth actually contributes to better emotional regulation under stress too. So we're able to process negative emotions in a way, like a quicker way and a more efficient way, instead of kind of ruminating and sticking with our negative thoughts. And I'll stop here because that was kind of a lot. So if anyone has any questions, or wants to chime in, they can. But I'm also going to lead us through a little practice to try to develop a little bit of self-worth. Ooh, Belinda has a question.
Linda does have a question. Hi, everyone. It's so great to see folks that I met in ACT and people I've seen out on LinkedIn. And so compassion was really easy for me to get my head around. The definition of compassion resonated at such a great level. And so it was not a stretch to say, okay, I'm willing to extend self-compassion as a predicate to being able to extend compassion to others. However, like you said at the top of the hour, you weren't even aware that this kind of living with self-confidence, self-esteem, and all of the absence of external factors was even a possibility. So my question, and maybe I'm getting ahead, and probably you and Elise have this all planned out, but what steps do we take to develop these skills of not having the ego or the sympathetic nervous system drive our thought process? I'm reading Eckhart Tolle's New Earth right now and trying to learn when my thought forms are controlling my being. And finally, I want to share with the group that I have a rare disease where I have 0% cortisol. So when you have 0% cortisol, you have to take high dose steroids in order to live. And so that's another nifty thing that I will not burn everybody's time with, and maybe follow up with Kristine on at another time. But so my question is, okay, the compassion was awesome, and I could even do self-compassion. But this stuff you're talking about today, I don't know. This seems awfully difficult.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. That's such a great question. And it is really hard to like know where to start when your life has been the opposite. But what I found to be really helpful is kind of not fighting the resistance, So when you have that resistance to feelings of like, ugh, like saying I am worthy or I am enough, like feels so silly. Or like it feels like I can't believe that, or like other people are better than me. I can't, like, we're not equal in this way. There's no equality there. Or like I'm not as worthy as someone who's maybe more successful or, you know, is further along in their life. And what I found to kind of be helpful for me is to first off label that as a thought, be like, okay, that's just a thought. I'm not my thoughts. I can think those things, and it doesn't mean that they're not important thoughts, but they're just thoughts. Like when I tell myself, like, oh, I'm such a failure. Oh, I'm so stupid for doing this thing or making this mistake. I can just kind of remind myself, like, that's a thought. That's all that is. And also, um, when it comes to our sympathetic nervous system, I feel like there's a lot of talk about nervous system regulation now. It's becoming kind of like a popular thing, and maybe it has been for a while. And it's a really good thing, but I also think it's important to know that our nervous system activates for a reason, and not to feel like we're wrong or doing something wrong when that happens. So a lot of people have a tendency to go towards one of the nervous system responses. So mine is typically freeze or fawn. So I like shut down and I don't know what to say, or I try to make everyone feel really comfortable, even if I don't feel comfortable, which is more of the fawn response. It's like abandoning yourself for other people. And so now that I'm like aware of that, instead of like beating myself up for it, I can be like, oh, I'm having a freeze response right now, or oh, I'm having a fawn response right now. And that doesn't mean I can change my response, but I'm more aware of it. And I can kind of ask myself, like, okay, what am I trying to protect myself from right now? Like, where am I feeling this in the body? Like, and then I can even just say, like, thank you so much for trying to protect me, but I've got this. And it kind of moves me out of it just enough.
It kind of seems like, Kristine, like you were saying, what I'm hearing is kind of like the first step is like noticing that and like pausing to be aware of what's coming up for you. And I know the practice that you're going to lead us through, I think, is a great exercise as well.
Yeah, I also think like one of the smallest things you can do is like literally celebrate every single win you have, whether big or small. And when you start to kind of like savor every positive interaction you have or everything you do that is positive, it does start to negate that negativity bias. My my like friend and old boss, Rick Hansen, actually has a great practice called taking in the good, that you can Google and you'll find lots about it. That's a great way to kind of like combat that negativity bias. It's really about like thinking about a positive experience, letting it savor. It's like a positive neuroplasticity practice. So I can also put that in the chat afterwards. But I would love to then go ahead and lead us through this practice if everyone's happy with that. And thank you again, Belinda, for a really good question. So to begin this practice, you'll just find a comfortable position. Maybe roll your shoulders, take a quick stretch. And this practice will have our eyes open. So you can leave your eyes open. And we'll just take a few deep breaths together. So take a deep inhale in. And exhale twice as long. Inhale. Exhale twice as long. We'll just do one more. Take a deep inhale. And exhale twice as long. And now return to the natural rhythm of your breath. Now pick a spot in the wall in front of you, as far away as you can get. And if you have a window in front of you, you can also look outside of the window and pick a spot. Keep your gaze directly on that spot without moving your eyes. Now, looking at that spot, I want you to pay attention to what you see. What colors, what shapes, what textures. What do you see directly in front of you from the point where you're looking? Now, keeping your eyes on the spot you chose, expand your vision and awareness to the space around you. What do you see surrounding you in your periphery? You might notice trees outside of your window, art on the wall, papers on the desk. What do you notice? What shapes, colors, shadows, light, textures? Maybe you start noticing things you've never noticed before. Now I invite you to release your gaze and close your eyes. Now shift your awareness to the experience of hearing. Notice the sounds and the space around you. Perhaps notice the sounds you hear outside. Notice how sounds come and go. And notice the space between the sounds. Rest your attention simply on listening with awareness. How does it feel to notice what surrounds you with present moment awareness? What you see and hear simply exists. There's no judgment or criticism. Now bring to mind someone you care about. Notice how you feel when you think of this friend or loved one. When they make mistakes or fail, how do you respond? Notice any feelings of care or tenderness you might feel for this friend or loved one. Do you see them as not enough when they fail? Do you find them less worthy of love, happiness, support, and safety? These questions probably feel quite unnatural. Now release your friend or loved one from your mind and bring to mind a time you failed or made a mistake. Notice how it feels to bring this to mind. Do you allow these mistakes and failures to affect the worth you feel in the world? Now put your hands over your heart or somewhere on your body that feels comforting to you. Another option is to shift your attention to the feeling of your feet on the floor or your seat in the chair. Notice the warmth of your hands on your body or the sense of support underneath you. Now repeat these phrases silently to yourself. I am enough just as I am. My life matters. I am worthy of love, happiness, support, and safety. I am whole and complete just as I am. My life has meaning. Let's repeat these phrases one more time to let them sink in. I am enough just as I am. My life matters. I am worthy of love, happiness, support, and safety. I am whole and complete just as I am. My life has meaning. Now take a moment to contemplate these questions. What would you do differently if you knew that you were worthy? What dreams would you pursue if your self-worth wasn't at stake? What would you stop doing if you knew you were already worthy? And what do you think the world might look like if we all had a solid foundation of unconditional self-worth? Now release these questions from your mind, and whenever you're ready, you can start to wiggle your fingers and toes, maybe take a big stretch, roll your neck, and open your eyes whenever you're ready. And I know that we're at 10. We went like slightly over. So if you need to go, no worries. This is being recorded, but if anyone wants to stay on, and I would love to hear, like, how did it feel to say these phrases to yourself? Does it feel good, energizing? Do you feel resistance or discomfort? What comes up for you? You can share in the chat, or you're more than welcome to unmute and share with the group as well.
I find that I felt a lot of like tension around it. It was very helpful when I was thinking about a loved one. And, I think that's always really revealing for myself of like, I would never talk to a loved one or a friend the way that I often talk to myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to second that from Elise. I was thinking about my kids, and they're 2 and 4, and all the time we're teaching them. I mean, we're doing our best to teach and to show this unbridled compassion. And why can't I do that for myself? It's just, I would never want my kids to grow up thinking that they need to be seeking my approval and my all the time, and we're trying to teach them and unteach them and all the things all the time. And it's like, why can't I have any of this, ruminate on the negative so much and never accept the positive? It's like, and I've been doing that. I'm 40. It's like, I've been doing this for so long. It's like, how am I gonna, yeah. So I see these little innocent kids and I'm like, oh my gosh. Anyhow, so yeah, hit home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I noticed that's what really spoke to me when I first started learning about this and self-compassion too, was like reflecting on how do you treat a friend or loved one when they're struggling? And then the same question to me, it's like, whoa, that's the opposite. Like, it's so opposite. And I would never even have considered that I could treat myself the way that I treated someone I love. Like, that wasn't even an option in my mind. So when that like switch happened and I realized like, oh, I can do that for myself. Like I don't have to be so critical to myself all the time. It wasn't even like a choice I thought I had. So when I realized that I could kind of start to make that shift, it started to get a little bit easier, but I will say that it does take time. Like it's definitely a journey. I didn't like do this meditation once and was like, oh wow, my self-worth is unshakable. I'm still working on it. I think it's a lifelong journey, but even knowing that it's possible is so helpful. Because then when you do have those moments where you're like highly critical of yourself, you can kind of snap yourself out of it, even if it takes a bit to realize what you're doing.
I was gonna say I also liked like focusing in on something and then kind of like softening my gaze to what was around that point. And I feel like that felt symbolic for me of like these things that I focus on, that only we focus on about ourselves to the degree that we do, and noticing like color and beauty and these other things around that we all have within us too. I feel like that just kind of felt symbolic for me of, I know I have those things within me, even though I so often am focused on the things I need to improve or how to get better or how to, I don't know, get from point A to B.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the visual and the sound. And it's actually really nice to do it when you're like out walking in nature too, because I'll see like a tree that's like, you know, bent weird, or it's like lost a branch. And I don't look at that and say like, you're less worthy, you know? Like I don't walk by people on the street and think that. And so it just like, it almost makes it silly when you start to have self-critical thoughts, when you can look at something like a bird or a tree and be like, I would never say that about that thing, and I don't even know anything about it. So yeah, I just find that to be like really helpful to like broaden that awareness of, why would I be that way towards myself when I'm literally not that way towards anything else in the world? And it's a very big world.
Amanda said, it makes me kind of sad because I wish I heard those words more as a child, but I know it's important to believe them within myself to heal that inner child. And that makes me think about what Tara was saying too. It's like you love, they don't have to, your children don't have to like prove something to be worthy or to be loved. And I think that's such a, yeah, I think it's really hard when we didn't necessarily have that feeling during childhood, and or reconciling that as adults too.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And it's like so important, like what Tara was saying, like now that you're learning this and you're going to pass it on to your kids, like that's so important. Like I even think about being a teenager and how learning this would have been life-changing, with like the amount of just like bullying and anxiety and like changes you're going through. Like learning these skills then would have been really powerful.
This is such a, it's such a hard topic because it is an ongoing journey. You know, it's not just like, oh,
Yeah.
fixed. But
And
I
it's
do.
uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it takes time to sink in, but it is nice. Elise shared, it reminded me that I do have value and worth as a person and a professional. But it is really difficult to navigate this kind of within the society we have, is what Rachel shared, which is very true. I feel like we're just the way things are in society, we're basically pushed to compare ourselves like 24 hours a day to other people. So it's definitely a challenge to break these habits.
Thanks everyone for showing up and yeah, just connecting in this way. It's so, it feels very personally, I feel like so much power and connection in it. It just like is so nice to hold space with like-minded people or people thinking about the same things. So
It is. And Meg asked, will there be more of these sessions? Yes, Elise and I are trying to do these probably bi-monthly. We haven't totally figured out like the cadence of them yet, but our first one was in February and it was on self-compassion. And I'll put a link to that one in the chat because it was also recorded. And then we might do a part 2 for self-worth. But if you have any topics that you would like us to cover, like feel free to share them with us too, because we're very open. I also made a little self-worth worksheet for everyone that I'll put a link to in the chat. It just has like one of the reflection questions and a practice that you can kind of create your own self-worth phrases. Because the ones in the meditation come from me and other people, but I'm sure there are some that are more specific to you and your situation that would be helpful to repeat. Especially if you're like in a life transition and there's something like tied to that life transition that you would like to include, like I deserve a career where I feel supported, or, you know, something like that. So I'll put that in the chat along with my links and Elise's links so you can stay in touch with us. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend.
Yes. Bye, everybody.